Thank you so much. As our host today said, thank you so much for having us. Dongshin and I are going to talk about our collaboration, which culminated in this book called Teaching Writing Through Theater. And just to settle us all into the kind of two threads that um, bring us here, that brought us together as collaborators, in the chat, if folks want to share on either or both of these questions, do you do any of your research about teaching? Is any of your scholarship about pedagogy in some way? And then is there any manner in which that intersects with your larger academic field? And then the other thread that our book traces, that our work considers, have you ever thought about teaching through this lens of theater or performance? Oh, I love to see that, Elizabeth. Your dissertation was on this topic. Fantastic.
And thanks again to Julie, Pablo, Luisa, that for having us here. And it's a great pleasure to be able to give this talk to our Hunter colleagues. And then, so any thoughts or feedback on this? We'd just like to hear from you because I would say that this is really indeed a journey for both of us. We never thought that we would end up writing a book about writing pedagogy through theater. And so today we would like to share how we get started and then also throughout this process, what we learned and where we are going next. And so it'd be great to see if you have any interest in what we do and then any connections, questions. Please feel free to, put in the chat and then we will pay attention to the chat as much as we can. Kelly looks like it's
Yes.
kind of busy.
Yeah, Julie mentions that especially teaching a language class, right, feels like a performance. I love this, Karen. I feel that there's an element of theatricality in my presentations and teaching. And when I do Romeo and Juliet, the students have a lot of fun performing scenes and playing with the language. It's beautiful. And fantastic, Jennifer, co-authoring with Julie about teaching information literacy through book history, which is your personal interest. I love to hear about collaboration. And I love to hear that people are thinking about these crossroads between, the more proper academic fields in which you might be trained and the work that we do as professional educators. And that's funny, Jennifer, feeling like a clown.
Oh, that's something we will address in the book as well. So, shall we? And please feel free, to jump in whenever that, yes, in a good way.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we'll discuss our collaboration and the development of the book. We didn't come up with a book idea in mind at all. And so this is a process that we took. And then we will give you an overview of the key concepts that we use in the book, and then especially theater concepts that we use. And then we will share some examples and then to get your feedback. And then we will have some like a reflections. I trust you can trust me and Kelly. We can talk about the book forever. We have so yes, and so that's what we'll discuss today. And
So
yes.
to what Dongshin was just saying, we didn't enter into this work with any notion that we were ever going to write a book about it. In fact, largely our collaboration was kind of made to be by Hunter. I was a graduate teaching fellow through the CUNY Graduate Center and was assigned first to be a TA for Dongshin's intro course. And then after that was the writing fellow assigned to Hunter's theater department. Oh, I guess it was around 2012. And that from that work, we really started to develop this working relationship, thinking about the principles of writing across the curriculum. Dennis Paoli, who used to run the Writing Across the Curriculum program and run the Writing Center there, was hugely instrumental, not only in developing my own practice as a composition instructor, but also in terms of kind of making this collaboration happen and having a vision for what we might contribute by working together on this particular subject. And then I actually participated in an ACERT workshop through that WAC fellowship. I'm in the person in the yellow sweater in one of the photos on the ACERT website. You can go find me later. Um, And then Dongshin and I started to just kind of arrange to have regular meetings, regular dialogues, all the way through from that point in the 20 teens, straight on through the current moment. In the about 2 or 3 years ago, we learned about the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning program at CUNY, and we were privileged enough to be accepted as part of that program, which really escalated our process in a lot of meaningful ways. But this is largely a collaboration that we made happen because we were interested in talking about this subject, and because we were interested in sharing knowledge with one another and building our teaching skills collaboratively.
Yeah. And then if we could go back to the previous slide, just briefly, that I would definitely say that the WAC, this program really got us started. And so when I first met Kelly, my goal was very, very simple, which is I wanted to improve my teaching of this requirement of a research paper. Because I teach like a war theater courses, and then I see how my students were struggling with writing the paper. And so I just wanted to be able to help them. And some of this fellowship just came down to me. It's just like, now you have a writing fellow. I was like, great. So I wanted to really make sure how to make that happen because I couldn't make it happen myself. And so with that, and that's really our first like project together, is how to help me help my students improve their writing. And from there, I also joined ACERT because after I arrived at Hunter, I wanted to improve my teaching, especially handling such a diverse like a student body. I wanted to make sure how I can teach better to teach them. So actually, I also joined lots of extra activities. I see Xiaoquan here, and also Xiaoquan, I will like to thank you for introducing me to a educational technologist, Nancy. And then also with that, it was a long-term relationship. I was like, I wanted to do better, and I was teaching intro, and I explore with different technologies in order to help me to teach better. So I would say from WAC to ACERT and then to SOTO, those are places that are in my when I came to Hunter, I never thought I would work on pedagogy. But my goal was just, I really wanted to teach better. I guess that was the drive. And I wanted to learn. And so these are places I'm very thankful that provide like such opportunities. And then we will move on. And then later I met Julie and others for the very critical moment is the pandemic. Yes, Kelly, sorry. Next slide.
No, not at all. And then we realized somewhere in that process that we maybe had something that, first and foremost, other people might be interested in collaborating with us on. We had some open questions. We wanted to hear from others in both of our fields, so in theater, but also in um, writing pedagogy. So we started to take this idea, if you will, out on the road and pursued opportunities both to participate in conferences. And we both were part of panels, as well as perhaps more importantly, for developing the key concepts for the book, putting together working groups and conference sessions with organizations like the Association for Theater and Higher Ed, the American Society for Theater Research, and the Modern Language Association, and pursuing opportunities to start publishing some of the ideas. And that first project that Dongshin mentioned, that was just about how do we help students to write better research papers, was something we worked on for a fairly long period of time. And then we're able to publish as a chapter in the New Directions book, which was really the first time we saw what contribution we might make within the field by writing about these topics that we had been exploring. And that article became developed into a chapter in our current book on the whole idea of the scaffolded research paper, which was something that we learned about through our WAC training and really fine-tuned to work in the theater history classroom. And then from there, right, we branched from, okay, well, that's the high stakes writing project. What about the low stakes writing that happens on a regular basis? And we spent the next couple of years developing this article for theater topics, low stakes writing in the theater classroom, which again became one of the chapters in our book. And after we had finished those two projects, after we had convened roughly about 5 or 6 of these conference sessions, we started to realize there's a bigger project at hand here. There is something to be said about the ways in which we're thinking about the crossroads between writing and theater. And maybe we didn't say this specifically at the outset, but I'll draw attention to it now, even though we both have PhDs that are in theater and performance studies. I teach in an English department, principally teaching things like the Intro to Composition course, right? The skills-based writing courses. And Dongshin is often teaching more content-based courses within the theater department at Hunter. So thinking about those two sides of the coin, how do we balance this sometimes very difficult challenge of teaching both content and skills, and how do we weight those things depending on the nature of the course we've been assigned?
And then I would like to share that actually when we uh, first started, that actually was Dennis who suggested that we could write something about this. And we were like, really? And then because that, just to be very honest, even though I had a PhD, but I was never taught how to teach. Does that make sense? It's kind of just assume you, since you have a PhD, you know how to teach. And sometimes now thinking back, it's very absurd. And then, so teaching also takes training, and then also that, and then also in order to write these articles, actually we have many, many questions about our caliber in order to, evaluate our evidence, our methodology. And I also consulted with through Xiaojuan, to look at some other like social science, approaches. And we really decided we are not social scientists, that we couldn't really do all these models, IRBs, etc. So it's not that these two articles just came out very naturally. And as well in the priority of what we do in school, I just want to put it in is that it seems that pedagogy was not treated like regarded as something very valuable for what you do for your job. Just like you just assume you could do it, and then and so this kind of like this route to really thinking about teaching and how to teach better and really engage these ideas with theater was something that it was through many, many conversations that we had. It's not that we just came out with these two articles very like easily. We asked lots of like questions about like what we are doing, in terms of careers and our trajectory, our interests, scholarly interests, etc. But we tried out our ideas multiple times. It's not that we always like met with like an enthusiasm, like like a wholehearted like an embrace of what we do. And so it's a long process, but we too continue because we just thought that since we continue to teach, and this is something that we do every day, we think about it every day, and how do we do it better? And I'm very fortunate to find Kelly as someone who is willing to listen and brainstorm and then discuss and then propose ideas and then to hear if we receive anything. Yes.
And I want to elevate what Jennifer is saying in the chat here. I agree, this is a big omission in graduate training. Actually, the CUNY Graduate Center did give a class. It was a zero credit class on quote unquote how to teach, which I was very privileged to be able to participate in. But I recognize that many enter the profession without that opportunity. And to your second point, Jennifer, right, about devoting too much time to thinking about pedagogy, this was one of the things we realized if we were members of something, for example, called the Association for Theater in Higher Education, then we should be having conversations with the membership about what that means, what it means to be teaching theater in higher ed. And we've found that by bringing these ideas kind of out on the road at conferences, there are a lot of people who want to participate in our working groups. The most recent one we did at ATHA, I would say there was, Dongshin, probably close to 20 people who were involved in that working group. So hopefully we're going to see some shifts about what this mindset is regarding pedagogy moving forward.
And then along the way, these are ideas that really affect us because, as you know, we started to look into, what writings are out there, and then what would affect us, and then I would say that maybe I would talk about one and then Kelly could talk about the other, then we take turns. I would say the John Bean, that book, Engaging Ideas, actually was given through the WAC like a program. It's like a given book, and read this book. And I would say at the very beginning, we started so many great ideas. I just like teach by that book, Let me try this technique. And sometimes I failed, sometimes I succeeded. So that was a uh, definitely a very important inspiration for us. Really, like writing is a process, it's not a product. And then how do you engage students through that process? Lots of very practical, tips, techniques, and that one is really important for us.
And then I'll shout out the LaGuardia Center for Teaching and Learning. I took a training during, I think it was the first full year. We were virtual during the pandemic, which I believe was called Beyond the Pandemic, where Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed was one of the assigned texts. And we were given an opportunity to do some close reading and to talk about what it meant for us in relationship to this new move to distance learning and what we would do right beyond that when we went back to classrooms, whenever that was going to be. And I brought a lot of that back to those. At that time, Dongshin and I were meeting as often as twice a week to talk about these issues. And we went back to that text just over and over and over throughout our process as a kind of central place for us to gain inspiration of how do we break with that banking method? How do we create situations where we're truly dialoguing with our students? And maybe most importantly, right, how are we making sure that what we're doing in our classrooms is what our students need, right? That we're benefiting them with everything that we're providing in the course itself.
And then, along the way, we found this writing by Jackie Tuck, who is teaching in the UK. And in this, because the title just seems to be very close to what we do, academics engaging with student writing. And she has a chapter called Creating a Hospitable Space in the Classroom. And she offers lots of great ideas, how to make the classroom more hospitable, meaning that you offer something to the students, you welcome them in, and then you engage them in the critical thinking and writing. So we continue to draw upon Jackie Talk, to talk about this and engage that with Paulo Ferris, like how do we go out of this banking method, meaning like just feed the students with, information. How do we really engage them in the learning process? And so that's one that we also return to and find her concept very useful.
Yeah, I joked to Dongshin just the other day that like there came a point where I was like, I can't quote the hospitable space line anymore in the book. It's taking up too much real estate in the book because it was just that foundational of a concept for us. And I use that as a bridge to the Mary Snyder Broussard piece, Reading, Research, and Writing, because that was the other quotation I just kept coming back to over and over and over as we were putting this project together, this central concept that she raises that has to do with rehearsal, thinking of the classroom as a rehearsal space. And that was an idea that really kind of hit a light bulb for us. I'm just going to skip ahead a couple slides because I have it on another slide. Thinking about the ways in which the classroom could be a place for the kinds of experimentation that happen in rehearsal, that it is a place where we are not just invited, but encouraged to try and fail, because it is through failure that we learn what to do. And she extrapolates this concept of rehearsal, or if you want to think of it as practice or training, as might happen in things like music or sports, to the practice of low stakes writing, that in fact, what we're doing when we make space for rehearsal of ideas, for the trying out of ideas, and the possibility of failure with those ideas and with those skills, that we really empower our students to do their best work, right? To think of learning as a process as opposed to focusing on an ultimate product at the end.
And then what really happened, actually, what really propelled this book project was that it was the pandemic. That the pandemic really turned lots of attention to teaching. Suddenly, we were put in a very dire situation. You had to teach students under such a very difficult circumstance, and you also have to learn very quickly, promptly how to teach. And it was the pandemic that brought people to acknowledge or reckon the importance of teaching, that are suddenly in lots of conferences, they welcome discussions about teaching and teaching pedagogy. And I also say that, and it was at that time I met Julie, and I think Julie and Shao worked very closely with all these trainings for teaching, because suddenly we had to learn how to teach, remotely. Before the pandemic, I never taught online, never, ever.
Same.
And yeah, never ever. And that really opened up lots of thinking about teaching, because before the pandemic, I would never thought of online teaching. I would never argue that you can make online teaching work. But now I'm going to argue for that. I think it really opened up lots of thinking about teaching. And I would say the conferences became more welcoming for such discussions. And because of the pandemic, we were able to put together a huge working group in theater, and then with people who are very interested in discussing pedagogy. And I would say that that was the moment. I don't know if this momentum has gone, but for me and Kelly, we continue. But it was that we thought that we could make a book project that out of these ideas, we work on high stakes writing, low stakes writing, and how can we engage this with teaching and also what we do, because we are both trained in theater.
So that brings us perhaps to the main event, the book itself. So if you scan the QR code, you can go to the website. I tested it before the session. It did work. I hope it still works. To see the book itself on Springer's website. But the idea here was to bring together the various threads that we had started to explore in our work together into one volume that would allow us to think through the practices of teaching writing, particularly through the frameworks, as Dongshin was saying, that we were trained in as people who do work in things like dramatic theory and performance and the theater more broadly. So obviously, we're going to be talking about learning across modalities and thinking about a wide range of things that go into what we think of as teaching. So things like class design, environment, activities, and curriculum. And our hope is that in the way the book is structured, that folks get an idea of both those theoretical frameworks. So there'll be in every chapter a theoretical framework from pedagogy and educational theory, one from theater and performance, and then after that, some actual practices where we reflect on the real experiences we've had in our own classrooms and thinking about them through the various lenses that theater and performance offer to us.
And then we can look at uh, we will share some our table of contents. So you will see that we started to think about the chapter one. Oh, is that a link to chapter one? Kelly, is there a way that we can put in the chat? So we decided to share with you chapter one. So you will see you will have access to chapter one, and then we will share this PPT. And so you will see chapter one is kind of like a overview of the chapters. And then beginning from chapter two, we start to think about teacher-student relationship. In a classroom, we're thinking about, like director and actor through that lens, in theater. And then chapter three, to think about the actual classroom, like a space, is it for rehearsal or for performance, right? That are we performing in our class, or are we just part of the rehearsal process? And to think in that way. And number four is definitely is online teaching, because in theater, the difference between theater, I saw my colleague earlier here, Professor Mira Fellner, in her very foundational book about introduction to theater. There's this quality of theater is live. And what if we cannot do live? What do we have to teach, not live? And we try to rechange that, to think about this importance of liveness in terms of teaching and learning. And then chapter five is low stakes writing. That's what we would like to share with you. And then number six is about this scaffolding research project. And then chapter seven is about thinking about if you are going to teach students more than once, you're seeing students throughout different semesters, and what kind of trajectory are you planning for the students? And then chapter eight is about assessment grading, and thinking about uh, um, uh, directors or like critics, how do you assess the success or completion of a project? And chapter nine is really about peer collaboration. How do we collaborate so trying to look at how these are done in the field of theater, and then how can we draw upon the concepts to talk about what we do in the classroom. Yeah.
And I'll just say, if we kind of take the other lens of that, the theater lens, just very quickly going through the chapters. So chapter two looks at theories of the director. Chapter three looks at theories of performance space. Chapter four looks at this question of what does it mean to be live, particularly in light of like post-humanist theory and what liveness looks like when it happens in virtual spaces. Chapter five, obviously, this idea of rehearsal we've talked about. Chapter six, thinking about the overall production process, what it means to put a production together. Chapter seven, thinking about the idea of actor training, something that happens over a lifetime, as opposed to just the preparation for a singular performance. Chapter eight thinks about criticism, both from a director, but also from theater critics. Chapter nine thinks of the quality, another one of those universals of the theater from Mira Fellner, that it's a collaborative art form. And then the introduction and conclusion, or preface and epilogue, were spaces for us to just kind of reflect on our feelings and thoughts and overall crossroads between theater and performance and the work we do as instructors of writing.
And
So
so, yes, and then we will get to talk about, just to give you a few examples. Low stakes writing is what we are still doing in our classes. We are treating teaching students teaching. We focus on the process, and also we focus on how to make them feel comfortable writing. And then in order to do so, it's through like all these like a low stakes writing. For example, and then Kelly could give her example, is that I still continue to practice each class session. I allocate class time to actual writing, writing like a handwriting, or and now this semester I accommodate a student's request because who had trouble writing by hand, but I allow the student to type and then into a Google Doc. And what I do is that I feed the students prompts in relation to the course materials. And then I use as an opportunity to kind of gauge their learning progress. And I assure them, as long as they answer the prompts, they will get credits for their effort, not the right or wrong. But the point is that they put in their effort. They are invested in the course material. And I will use their in-class writing the next class session, and I will come back and say, this is what you wrote last time. now I get what you learned, and let's do this way. So I use that as a way for me to gauge how they learn. And then low stakes writing, how I grade it by efforts. As long as they do it, they do not just do it to fulfill any kind of, as long as they write something, even though they say, I just do not understand, you need to help me out here. And that is very productive for me. Kelly?
I also have my students write in every single class session. I'm more flexible about whether it's handwritten or typed. I'm also more flexible about whether it's handed in during class time. I recognize that many students probably need more time than the usual 15-minute block that I set aside, especially in the introduction composition course, where they're really just beginning to write. But generally, my practice is the same. And thinking of that through this lens of theater and performance, what this really meant for us, or what this mirrored for us in the practices we knew from our field, was what happens when we work on a theater production. We are encouraged as performers, as creatives, to try something, knowing what it is the director is looking for, having read the play or worked with the playwright, having a sense of, right, what the contours are of what we're exploring, and then to just try something, to put in effort, right? Sometimes we go too far, sometimes we don't go far enough, but it gives us an opportunity to figure out in a really active way what the final product is going to be. And we saw that bringing this pedagogy into our classrooms, or this mindset into our classrooms, was going to be very student-centered. It would put them at the middle of the process of discovering what course texts or daily topics or things we've watched or looked at as a class mean to and for them, as opposed to simply just regurgitating something that I might have said in a lecture or they might have read in a textbook. And I think, Dongshin, if you want to take the scaffolded research paper, go for it.
Yeah, and then another thing that we're still doing that now is about this. I still have a final project, a major research project for my classes, and what I learned throughout the years that I break it down into smaller portions. That in the past, when I had the benefit of the teaching fellows came in to do like a uh, what thesis statement, right, and research, bibliography, etc. And now I learn how to do them, and I schedule this research paper assignment into multiple smaller components. Start with survey, just to gauge, and then to look at how they do research, and then help them develop a research question from there, how to conduct research, and as for a work in progress report, and then a presentation, and then eventual submission. And so trying to make this like a, because it is always like a high stakes assignment, like taking lots of percentage of the class. And the way to really diffuse the anxiety and stress is really to kind of spread it out, explaining the process and getting the input and leading them there. And so again, process versus product. And I would say I still have students who still would just do everything at the last minute. That would defeat the whole purpose. But in all the this has made the process much more like a uh, productive and also very enjoyable at the very end to see how they progress. Kelly.
Yeah, I also break all of my written assignments into smaller components. My components are usually deeply inquiry based. We have inquiry and problem solving as one of our core competencies. And I think a lot about how questions are important, right? That we have to have a question we're trying to answer as we pursue research. And therefore, we do questionnaire activities, we do pair share and interview activities, just opportunities for the students to be asking what they want to ask about the material and making small discoveries over time, over the many weeks of the course. And the thing that they hand in at the end of the course is meant to be a reflection of 12 weeks worth of work instead of, right, the last 4 hours before it was due's worth of work. Though, of course, there's always the students who are going to do all the work at the last minute, as Dongshin said. And again, mirroring this through the theater lens, we would never attempt to put on a fully realized production without having worked on all of the component pieces, sometimes in extreme isolation from one another, before we put the whole thing together, and certainly before we would share the work with an audience. So it seemed a fairly obvious one-to-one that we could use this framework of how we build a performance for public consumption as a kind of model for how we might think of that final high stakes assignment and its a sort of implementation over the course of a semester. And I cannot highlight enough how much this lens from theater and performance really brought us back to the importance of process over product, that we are doing something that takes all semester to do. And that's what matters much more so than whatever this final thing is that's going to get made at the end, that we are valuing the 12 weeks of practice, and that final product should be a culmination of the, multi-week process.
And this one is definitely is also very important about this teacher-student relationship that and we are fully aware of the hierarchy, as exists in theater practice as well. That this like a director is like the source of power, authority, but they are also alternative models of creating theater. And we are fully aware of that the power dynamic in the classroom, and so this comes to the challenge of how to create trust in the classroom. They're just like so difficult because eventually you need to evaluate students' work, and how to really make sure that you could have very genuine and honest conversation and dialogue about learning. And so we try to really rethink us because there are different kinds of directors, directorial styles. We too don't think we are the so-called auteur directors. It's like my view is the view, but we try to really to conceive our roles as more like guide, facilitator, coach, that how do we guide them get to where we want them to be? Like, if we are leading them on a journey, right? And so, and how do we coach them, like in acting? How do you coach? It's not you can do it, but how do you make them, help them do that? And so that's we are moving more toward more collaborative model making theater, and so that's something we value, and also about how we interact with students. Kelly.
Yeah, this was really, I think, one of the central themes for me to work through. And you'll probably notice chapter 2 is maybe the longest chapter in the book, because there was just so much to unpack here. This question of authority or hierarchy was one I was really grappling with a lot in my own practice. Before I went to my role at New York Historical, my other job at another college, really, I had created a dynamic with the students where things were so informal, where it felt almost as if everything that was valuable about the teacher-student relationship had maybe come undone. That I think, as Dongshin was saying, it's so important to build trust, but trust is maybe different than personal friendship. And that was maybe something that I was kind of struggling to balance. What is the nature of this relation between the teacher and the students that can still be one that feels collaborative and generative and frankly positive, but that is not so informal that students maybe don't take the coursework or assignments as seriously as they need to in order to make the most of the learning in the class. And going into the literature about the director-actor relationship was so eye-opening for me in answering that question. Reading work by Claire Seiler and Ben Spatz and thinking about the ways in which, yes, there is this very personal, trust-based relationship between actors and their director. But at the end of the day, there is also this acceptance that the director does come into the room with a certain amount of authority, and that addressing that and drawing attention to that and making the most of the positive of that, right? That there is someone to help, there is someone to guide, there is someone to facilitate, there was someone to help make decisions, right, and answer questions was so very important to me. And I try in my classrooms at LaGuardia, right, to always be really open and addressing privilege. My privilege, as a white person coming into the classroom, like what does that mean and how does that speak to our relationship in the work that we're doing? My power as the person who gets to be called professor, and what does that mean in the classroom? And this, like I said, really helped me think through how we can still maintain or still work within this structure of teacher and student in ways that would be most generative and most likely to create trust between myself and my students. And I encourage you to take a look, not just at what we've written, but at some of that scholarship on directing and acting. It was just so valuable to me in thinking about the teacher-student relationship question.
And this one, actually, we are two are still subject. We are still debating. So what we provide is like as of now, and this is a huge topic. We just realized when you started to do research about assessment, like how to assess student like a success, student writing, and then we continue to discuss how starting from how we grade, the importance of grades, and then etc. And so again, that we are drawn to this book, and I think again, Julie and Shao, we read this book on grading. That is a great book that really opened up our eyes to this idea about ungrading. How do we ungrade? And then so there's something we try. So maybe this is one way of diffusing this kind of power relationship, and also thinking the difference between grading and assessment. And then so what is the difference between like a graded assignments and assignments by efforts only, right? So the all these so I think that I have tried mixing graded assignments. For example, I asked for like essays, right, final projects with actual grades, and then but for the in-class writings are by efforts. So what I'm doing is kind of like a mixture, try and read to diffuse the stress and anxiety, but while at the same time, how do I assure the students really learn and do work? And Kelly, we want to talk about the grading contract that you use.
Yeah, so I took a lot of inspiration from Bloom's book. I also was privileged enough to participate in the Writing Is Symposium a few years ago, where I learned about grading contracts, which are basically documents that help students to make a decision at the outset of the semester of which grade they are going to try and achieve over the course of that semester, depending on which assignments they do and how much of the coursework they complete makes the decision as to whether they're going to get an A, B, or C in the class. And that's all written out for them. They choose the grade that they want to strive for, and then they do or don't do those assignments over the course of the semester. I will admit that this is something that I have moved away from since the time that we wrote the book. I experimented with it. I think it's a really fascinating way to put students at the center of their learning process. But I found that, especially in a class like Composition 1, where students really need to come away with a certain amount of foundational skills in order for me to feel confident that they should be advanced to the next level, the 102 and beyond courses, that simply saying, hey, you did the assignment was maybe not enough in terms of, right, the burden that's on me to make sure they're prepared for what the next course calls for from them. Again, that role of the director, making sure that no one's going to put on a performance that they won't feel fully confident in when they get on stage. So I still do a lot of assignments that are credit, no credit, where there's kind of just a basic checklist of things they need to accomplish. Maybe it's in terms of length, or maybe it's in terms of references or things like that, so that students are able to rehearse their ideas throughout the semester, but generally it's a more maybe holistic approach to grading that students don't sign on for at the beginning of the semester as they might with a grading contract. And thinking about the theater framework here, it was so interesting looking at theories of theater criticism, which felt like it would be the logical pairing for this particular chapter, except that theater critics are usually thought of as exterior to the process of making the performance. They come in after the fact as this kind of ultimate judge of the quality of a particular work, and exploring that tension and embracing the places in which the theater metaphor maybe isn't successful or is challenging or limiting was also really worthwhile for me as thinking about this crossroads between the practical work and the theoretical work that I do as both a writing instructor and a theater professional.
And then, and this will be our the self promotion. This will be our last slide. So, uh, of course, like in public, I have to thank that Kelly. That as you know, that we proposed the book during the pandemic, and we received a contract, and then we pushed through, and that especially at the very end, and to have it published last year. And so I have to thank Kelly a lot for making this happen for its like final stages. And after the book, we continue to talk. We it's not that that's it, you know, that's we are done. We decided we will continue, and so now we are still thinking a lot about assessment because that's what we do. You know, students, we have to admit students still come in. They just some students say very clearly, I want a good grade. You know that grades matter, but how can we help them? We would like to give them good grades, but how to get them there, right? To learn, and then I am now for this semester, I just decided I'm going to focus on collaboration because collaboration is so important for theater to happen, and I wanted to see how I can explore more, you know, about collaboration. How can I make it happen? As we know that Hunter students have very different, challenging schedules. It's very hard for them to work together for group projects. I have failed multiple times, or many, many times. At some point, I gave up. I just decided it was just not worth my time to really try. But I really see the importance, though, especially of as we are coming back from the pandemic, we need to this really to work together, and this is how we are going to move forward. So I'm trying. Once I figured out how to do that better, I will share. I'm trying to figure it out and learning about readings about like a collaborative learning. There's a very wonderful book just called Collaborative Learning. I'm stealing ideas from that book now. I could put that in the chat very quickly. And then Kelly.
Yeah, I just wanted to shout out again the work I've been privileged enough to do through the Center for Teaching and Learning at LaGuardia. I got to be part of the Decolonization in the Humanities seminar, and we all put together projects that we tried out in our courses. It absolutely innovated the way I teach my writing through literature class. I was lucky enough to be able to give a workshop on it through my other job at the New York Historical, and it's just these themes of decolonization are ones that I'm still grappling with in my own courses, especially as someone who teaches in a quote unquote English department, and the sort of you know, the questions that that raises about the work that we do. I was also privileged enough to be part of the oral history seminar through LaGuardia, and that really innovated my Composition 1 course, where now my students conduct interviews as part of their work. And I just encourage you, I know if you're here, this is probably preaching to the choir, as it were, but participate in these trainings because they really opened my eyes to the possibilities of things I hadn't even considered about my own teaching or about what we could do in my courses. And I'm always excited to have the chance to just think differently, think in new ways about what we do as educators. And I know we've only got a couple of minutes here, and I'm sorry if the display looked a little funky. My computer did something really weird right in the middle of this. So if anything looked weird at any point, I'm happy to share the slide deck. But if anyone's got any questions or comments in our last couple of minutes here.